They said she came back whole, but she couldn't remember her own name. Section 1. That line, spoken by a midwife in Millbridge, Maine, was buried in a handwritten letter never meant to see daylight. But now it's been found. And tonight, so have you. You've stepped into a forbidden corridor of American memory. And what you're about to hear will stain your soul with truths no man was ever meant to carry. The Ashford family is not a legend. It is a suppressed chapter, an erased lineage. Their name has been blotted out from every ecclesiastical record, redacted from state archives, and sterilized from history textbooks. But the land remembers, and so do the daughters who never came home. In the dead forests of eastern Maine, where the wind seems to whisper in tongues and the snow buries more than bodies, the Ashfords built something the townspeople called a convent. But this was no sanctuary. This was a laboratory, a theater of psychological erasure disguised as spiritual reformation. A house of God wrapped around a black cathedral of control. For 32 years, they operated with surgical precision. The women who entered its doors were not possessed. They were simply defiant, independent thinkers, lovers of forbidden knowledge, victims of men with too much power and no tolerance for resistance. And what did the Ashfords offer these families? Not salvation, not healing, but obedience, manufactured with scalpels, whispering gas, and rituals too ancient to name. Inside those cold stone walls, the mind was broken like a wild horse, reassembled into something passive, programmable. Eyes dimmed, memories vanished, and when the women were returned to their homes, they were hailed as miracles. But the miracle was a lie. What you're going to discover in this film is not just the Ashford legacy. It's the blueprint. A dark inheritance passed through institutions, veiled behind rituals, encoded into laws, etched into the American psyche. The Ashfords were not an anomaly. They were the prototype, and their methods have never gone away. Stay with me. You've already taken the first step. But what lies ahead isn't just horror. It's revelation. And revelations cost everything. Section 2 coming next. Section 2. It always starts with good intentions. That's the first rule of institutional control. Cloak the horror in the holy. And the Ashfords did it better than anyone. 3 women, 1 family, bound by blood, bound by secrets, and, according to certain vanished documents, bound by a forgotten European order that predated the Anglican Church itself. Agatha, Prudence, and Temperance Ashford didn't come to Millbridge to build faith. They came to perfect obedience. Their so-called convent wasn't funded by the local church. It was bankrolled through an untraceable channel of English gold and Vatican silence. There are whispers, if you know where to listen, that their passage to the New World was arranged not by clergy, but by a secret division of a European medical society obsessed with the brain, behavior, and the elimination of the soul. What they constructed in the Maine wilderness was not a sanctuary for prayer. It was a behavioral forge, a machine disguised as a monastery, with stone walls designed not to keep evil out, but to keep witnesses from hearing what happened inside. Because what happened inside was a science older than medicine and a doctrine darker than theology. The Ashford method was a blend of spiritual programming and neurological manipulation. They called it the discipline of grace. But those who studied their patients' scars knew better. It was a form of psychosurgery, a crude predecessor to the lobotomy, combined with extreme sensory deprivation, isolation, and ritualized punishment. Every sermon was calibrated, every prayer weaponized. Women were broken not by force, but by precision. Their resistance wasn't crushed. It was surgically removed. And here's where it gets colder. Agatha didn't consider herself a villain. She believed she was saving souls from themselves. She once wrote, "The devil is not in the flesh but in the will, and it is the will that must be purged." Understand this. When systems of power want to control a population, they don't need prisons. They need places that look like salvation. That's what the Ashfords created. A hall of mirrors where women lost the ability to distinguish correction from compassion, trauma from transformation. And men watched in admiration, because the women returned home quiet, grateful, and empty. It worked. Too well. Section 3 coming next. Section 3. There's something you need to understand about silence. Real silence. Not the kind you get in nature. Not peace. I'm talking about engineered silence. The kind designed in stone walls 3 feet thick, where screams can be reduced to a whisper. Where the human mind, stripped of stimulation, begins to unravel itself like thread pulled from a garment. This was Sister Prudence's domain. She was the surgeon of the soul, the hand behind the procedure, the architect of unmaking. While Agatha dealt in doctrine and diplomacy, Prudence was the executioner dressed in white. She didn't speak often. She didn't need to. Her instruments did the talking. She studied under a man named Dr. Erasmus Venn, an excommunicated British physician who believed that memory itself was the source of all rebellion. His unpublished work, On the Surgical Reformation of the Feminine Mind, was found decades later in a sealed crate beneath an abandoned sanitarium in York. Inside its pages were diagrams, uncannily similar to what was later discovered beneath the Convent of Eternal Tears. Scalp maps, emotion anchors, control pins. Prudence had learned to open the skull like a priest opens a book. She didn't seek to heal the mind. She sought to rewrite it, one woman at a time. The treatments began with isolation. No light, no sound, no contact. They called this the quieting chamber. After a week in that darkness, most minds began to hallucinate. That's when the ritual began. Chanting, restraint, and administration of a numbing agent created from native plants and imported opiates. And then the incision. Sometimes it was direct trephination above the temple to access the frontal lobe. Other times it was less invasive. Deep pressure, electrical stimulation, or hypnosis administered during altered states. The result was always the same. The woman would wake up, obedient. Husbands rejoiced. Fathers gave thanks. The church collected its donations and passed around testimonies of healing. But the healed could no longer remember the name of the child they once fought to keep, or the book that made them question their pastor, or the moment they realized their body was not owned by another. That memory was gone, and in its place compliance. Tell me, what's the difference between salvation and submission? When the subject can no longer remember their resistance. Before she was changed. Just a single sentence delivered like a spell. Father, I remember the woods. I remember what I saw. He said. The men froze, like they were staring at a ghost. Temperance had become the bridge between what was taken and what replaced it. She wasn't just an observer. She was a rehearsed outcome. A synthetic soul in a porcelain body. And this is where it gets darker. Because it wasn't just about silencing women. It was about crafting replicas. Creating idealized citizens, submissive, compliant, devout, who would never again question their roles. The convent was becoming a factory for psychological dolls. Empty, beautiful, and loyal. One surviving letter from Dr. Hartwell, written but never sent, contains a single disturbing line. The temperance protocol, once perfected, could transform the nation. Pause and hear that again. This wasn't a backwoods experiment. This was a prototype for scalable control. A model that could be replicated first for women, then for children, then for entire congregations. Do you see it now? The Ashford convent wasn't isolated. It was incubated, shielded, preserved by powerful hands that understood the potential of belief as a tool. And when those women returned to their communities, they spread it like a virus. Not through words, but through presence. Calm, quiet, conditioned. Not mothers, not wives, vessels. Tell me, how do you fight a machine when the machine wears the face of your daughter? Section 5 coming next. Ready to plunge further? Section 5. Let's abandon the lie once and for all. This wasn't about religion. Religion was the mask. A beautiful, intricate mask woven from scripture and sewn with guilt. But underneath, this was a war for control. A silent, clinical war waged not with bullets or blades, but with rituals, language, and scalpels that touched the soul. Because the Ashfords understood something your government, your church, and your school quietly learned to mimic. Control the memory, and you control the man. Control the identity, and you control the nation. The Convent of Eternal Tears was not an isolated house of horror. It was a lighthouse for others watching, others with money, reach, and political influence. For decades, men came from as far as Boston, Philadelphia, and even Washington under the guise of clergy visits and donations. But they weren't there for prayer. They were there for observation, to study what the Ashford sisters had achieved. A repeatable system of psychological reset. Women who emerged without rage, without contradiction, without memory of rebellion. The perfect domestic template. Now imagine that on a national scale. Dr. Hartwell, in a private paper never published, proposed establishing Reformation centers across the eastern seaboard for the moral correction of hysterical women, wayward children, and political dissidents. He wrote, "The Ashford method, disguised as charity, was to be exported like a moral vaccine, a cure for deviance. What happened behind those stone walls was never meant to stay in Millbridge." And here's the part no one dares put in textbooks. In 1831, just before the sisters vanished, a federal official visited the convent under an assumed name. His notes, later found charred but partially legible, described unparalleled methods of behavioral correction with zero mortality rate and permanent attitudinal recalibration. Permanent, attitudinal, recalibration. This was never about God. It was about a replicable formula to rewrite the human mind under the banner of virtue. You still think this is just a story? Look around you. Modern institutions, educational systems, correctional facilities, even media, follow the same architecture. Isolation, repetition, obedience, reward, and a refusal to let you remember who you were before the system touched you. You're not watching a horror story. You're reading your own blueprint. Section 6 coming next. Shall we go deeper still? Section 6. The fire that consumed the Convent of Eternal Tears on November 4, 1832, was no accident. Locals believed lightning struck the bell tower. Others claimed a stove exploded in the infirmary. But none of those rumors explain the timing. Because just hours before the blaze, 3 wagons left the property under heavy canvas, escorted by men in unmarked coats, government coats. Witnesses said they didn't see horses pulling the last cart. It moved on its own, clattering through the mud like something alive. No one stopped them, and when the flames rose, no one came to help. The church records were lost, the baptismal rolls gone, burial ledgers vanished, and most damning of all, the Ashford sisters were never found. Not their bones, not their rings, not even the silver cross that once hung from the gate, rusted black from years of salt wind. All that remained was a scorched foundation and a silence deeper than before. But let's break that silence. Because 5 years later, in 1837, a nearly identical structure appeared in upstate New York, the Sterling Institute for the Preservation of Womanhood. Same blueprints, same stone imported from the same quarry. And, get this, funded by the same family that oversaw the cleanup of the Ashford ruins. The name of that family? Whitmore. If you've heard that name before, it's because they later funded 2 Ivy League psychology departments, 1 controversial eugenics lab, and a behavioral research facility that would eventually feed into early CIA experiments in mind control. MKUltra didn't begin in the 1950s. That was the rollout. The prototype burned in Maine, and the ashes were carried east, not by wind, but by design. So ask yourself, why did no one mourn the convent? Why did the church never rebuild? Why did every family who sent a daughter there quietly disappear from public life? Because the Ashfords didn't die in that fire. They evolved. Into shadow, into doctrine, into curriculum, into a legacy that teaches obedience in the language of salvation. That erases the question before it forms. That smiles and says, "This is for your own good. Welcome to the real America." Section 7 coming next. Shall we keep burning deeper into the truth? Section 7. Do you know what silence sounds like after a system erases you? It's not peace. It's not absence. It's the hum of something still running without you. By the 1840s, a strange phenomenon began spreading through northeastern towns. Entire communities reporting that their daughters returned from schooling or service, improved, well-mannered, and yet eerily vacant. Some mothers described them as too quiet, too polite, as if they had been hollowed out and filled with lace and scripture. Others noticed they no longer remembered certain things: birthdays, first kisses, the smell of their brother's funeral. But what truly disturbed the townsfolk was what these women did remember. Phrases, lines, repetitions, scripted responses that felt rehearsed, like they were reading from a manuscript embedded in their mind. Everything is in God's order. Disobedience invites decay. A good woman is a still woman. Where had they learned that? Not in churches, not in schoolhouses, but somewhere off the record, somewhere beneath the curriculum. And the ones who resisted, they either disappeared or, far more chilling, were returned. Returned to their families different. One account from a midwife in Hartford tells of a young woman named Clara, once headstrong and vibrant, who came back from her season of refinement with a different accent, a different laugh. She didn't recognize her own handwriting, didn't know the names of her cousins, but she could recite, word for word, the Ashford litany, a prayer no one had taught her in town, one no church publicly acknowledged. Clara died 3 months later from what the doctor called spontaneous collapse of the nervous system. But her mother's final testimony is the real horror. She died like a marionette having its strings cut, not like a daughter, not like someone who remembered being loved. That's what this was all about. Not just controlling women, but severing memory from identity, so that what was returned looked like your child, but was not your child. The Ashfords had perfected something more terrifying than death. They had created the perfect spiritual imposter. And no one, not the church, not the doctors, not even the state, dared intervene. Because if they did, they'd have to admit it wasn't just happening in Maine anymore. Section 8 coming next. Ready to go where even history books refuse to follow? Section 8. They called it the mercy engine. Not a machine made of gears or steam but of minds. It was the whispered name for the Ashford system once it went underground, once it spread like fungus beneath the polite society of post-Civil War America. By 1865, following the war's end, hundreds of reform homes for women had sprung up across the eastern and southern United States. Most were run by Christian charities, medical missionaries, or patriotic women's guilds. But look closer. Beneath the surface, a chilling pattern emerges. Same funding lines, same architectural plans, same curriculum hidden in plain sight. In a Virginia facility known as Hollow Grove, former inmates recalled being forced to walk in silence for 72 hours straight while reciting phrases about obedience, modesty, and the cleansing fire of forgetting. They weren't allowed to speak their birth names. They were given new ones. But it gets worse, because one patient, Eliza Thornwell, escaped, and in 1872, she published a series of anonymous letters in a radical abolitionist paper. She described experiments where girls were made to stare into mirrored walls while being asked the same question hundreds of times until they no longer heard their own voice. She said some girls were left in underground chambers with only the sounds of weeping piped in through the ceiling. She ended her letter with a phrase that haunts historians to this day. They don't want to kill you. They want to keep your body and replace your witness. The mercy engine wasn't designed to destroy. It was designed to reboot, to take the ashes of a soul and build a servant from what remained. And now we arrive at the truly terrifying part. By the 1880s, the system had evolved. It no longer targeted just women. It began recruiting children, boys, entire families, and once again the Whitmore family name surfaces. In a single decade, they quietly acquired 3 orphanages, 2 women's hospitals, and a sanitarium for trauma and hysteria located in upstate Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania facility had underground archives no visitor was allowed to enter, guarded by armed men in church garb, but carrying federal-issued sidearms. What were they hiding? The blueprints, the rituals, the remnant of the Ashford doctrine, still alive, still practiced, and now under federal protection. This wasn't folklore anymore. This was infrastructure, a subterranean network of obedience, trauma, and silence masquerading as morality, funded by the elite and shielded by the holy. This was no longer just a convent horror story. This was a machine, and it was never turned off. Section 9 coming next. Shall we go deeper into the machine? Section 9. By 1899, the machine had a new name, the Sterling Program. No longer hiding in convents or cloistered schools, the Ashford Whitmore doctrine had been fully institutionalized, rebranded for modernity, sanitized for science, and backed by the Department of Moral Hygiene. What had begun as whispers in wooden chapels was now printed in state-funded psychology manuals. But the core aim never changed. Not correction, not education, erasure. The Sterling Program claimed to rehabilitate the morally defective and the emotionally unsound. It operated in more than a dozen facilities across the Northeast, each one housing hundreds of subjects deemed unfit for modern society. These included unwed mothers, rebellious daughters, immigrants, former slaves, orphans, and anyone who dared remember what they weren't supposed to. Inside, patients underwent what administrators called cognitive refinement sequences. In reality, they were subjected to sound loop therapy, isolation chambers, sensory deprivation, and a chilling new invention, the Tabor chair. Named after Father Lucian Tabor, a Jesuit defector who joined the Whitmore Alliance in 1883, the chair looked like a baptismal seat fused with a phonograph. The subject would be strapped in for hours, while a voice, calm, unwavering, and feminine, played over and over, "You are not who you were. You are not who you were. You are not who you were." Some broke after one session. Some resisted until their hearts gave out. And those who survived, they left with a new name, a new faith, and a memory that no longer belonged to them. One whistleblower, a nurse named Rachel Vinton, tried to testify before a Pennsylvania court in 1901. Her report detailed dozens of cases where patients emerged speaking in synchronized phrases, responding to external commands without blinking, sometimes even crying when asked to describe their childhoods, despite having no recollection of one. She disappeared before the second hearing. Her house was burned, her files destroyed, and her body was never recovered. But the Whitmores weren't done. They knew the next war would not be fought with bullets, but with memory, with belief, with identity. They didn't need to kill the future. They just had to rewrite it. And the Sterling Program was their pen. Section 10 coming next. Shall we keep going into the shadows behind modern psychology? Section 10. The 20th century arrived with promise. Electric lights, automobiles, radios, progress. But beneath the glow of American modernity, the Whitmores moved silently, like phantoms behind polished doors, morphing their ancient doctrine into something even more dangerous: science. By the 1920s, the Sterling Program had gone federal. Through a series of quiet mergers, obscure think tanks, and government research initiatives, their methods were absorbed into new agencies: behavioral sciences, institutional psychology, and most notably, the Bureau for Human Adjustment. It sounds harmless, but it was hell in a lab coat. Operating under the guise of curative psychology, the Bureau ran a network of facilities where subjects were experimented on for trauma resilience, memory modulation, and social obedience. And guess what? The Tabor chair returned, now outfitted with electrodes and audio programming tapes. They called it the Sterling Cognition Recliner. But it wasn't the chair that disturbed the few technicians who leaked information. It was the voices, the audio used in the sessions. Each one was identical. A soothing woman's voice speaking in loops. Never angry, never loud, just certain. You are safe when you obey. Your past was a dream. Let it go. We give you new purpose. Be thankful. The tapes were marked Saint Veronica Series. But no institution ever claimed authorship. No church ever admitted to making them. Worse still, survivors of these programs, often orphans, inmates, or poor immigrants, emerged unable to speak about what happened inside. Not because they refused, but because they couldn't. Their brains had been chemically and psychologically trained to redirect any memory tied to rebellion or trauma into a blackout state. Therapists called it Sterling amnesia, the perfect crime. But the trail didn't end in labs and clinics. It went higher, much higher. By 1943, during World War II, a classified memo surfaced in intelligence circles. It was titled, Sterling Integration Opportunities, Faith-Based Indoctrination for Occupied Populations. That's right. The same doctrine that once erased farm girls in Ashford sanctuaries was now being considered as a tool for global warfare. And the author of the memo? Gideon Whitmore III. The family hadn't vanished. They had evolved. From cloistered monsters into scientific architects of mass psychological obedience. They weren't just rewriting memory anymore. They were rewriting history. Section 11 coming next. Are you ready to uncover how this became a blueprint for modern control? Section 11. Listen closely, because now we're crossing the line from shadow into the very heart of the machine, where power is no longer hidden, but wielded openly under the guise of progress. After World War II, the Sterling program, now a sprawling network of institutions, laboratories, and government contracts, became the foundation for what would later be called Project Monarch. The name itself is a cruel joke, suggesting freedom and transformation, while in reality it was a system of psychological enslavement. Children were kidnapped, institutionalized, and broken down through ritualized trauma, sensory deprivation, and mind-numbing repetition. They were rebuilt as compliant agents, empty shells whose very souls had been rewritten by silent commands. The technologies pioneered in Ashford's dark convent, refined by Whitmore money, and developed in secret labs during the war became the templates for this new era of control. In the corridors of power, they knew the truth. To control a population, you don't need guns. You need obedience without thought. You need minds that don't question their chains because they don't even remember the shackles. And so, the legacy of the Ashford family lives on. Not in dusty tomes or forgotten ruins, but in systems of surveillance, media programming, and education designed to condition the collective consciousness. This is why so many men feel trapped in invisible cages, why patterns of behavior repeat like echoes in an endless hall. It's not coincidence. It's design. But here's what the gatekeepers never tell you. You don't have to accept it. This knowledge, as dark as it is your key. Because understanding how the machine works is the first step to breaking free. And now, halfway through this journey, I want you to make a choice. Type the phrase, I claim my mind, twice in the comments below. Lock it in. Because once you say those words, you start waking the part of yourself the machine wants silent. This is more than a video. It's a call to arms against forgetting, against manipulation, against the slow death of autonomy. Will you answer? Section 12 coming next. Ready to pull the veil back even further? Section 12. They call it the Great Forgetting. A quiet, relentless erasure that started long before your birth and continues now, invisibly shaping your reality. The Ashford legacy is woven into the very fabric of how modern institutions define normal, acceptable, even truth. What you believe is natural is often a carefully constructed illusion, designed to keep you compliant. The education system, the corporate media, the very structure of social order, all carry echoes of the Ashford method. Repetition, isolation, fear, and control dressed as care. Psychological chains forged by centuries of ritualized erasure don't always wear shackles you can see. Instead, they manifest as silent submission, a surrender of critical thought and an unquestioning acceptance of authority. This is the power system built on fear disguised as faith, obedience sold as salvation. And it's why you feel that tug, the part of you restless, seeking more, resisting the cage. Because you were never meant to see this. But now you do. The Ashford sisters' shadow stretches far beyond a burned-down convent. Their work became the blueprint for a global architecture of control, where minds are shaped before they even know they have minds. The institutions they birthed still operate today, cloaked in respectability, masked as benevolence. Hospitals, schools, government agencies, all complicit in continuing the cycle of psychological submission. But the truth is a virus. Once it spreads, it cannot be contained. You've taken the first step down a path very few dare to walk. And now, the question is no longer what they've done, but what you will do. Will you become another quiet victim of this design? Or will you fight to reclaim the autonomy stolen before you even understood it was missing? Because the darkest secret of all is this: the Ashford legacy thrives only when you don't know it exists. Section 13 coming next. Ready to see the strands unravel completely? Section 13. The final decades of the 20th century unveiled a terrifying truth. The Ashford Timor legacy wasn't confined to secret institutions or fringe government projects. It had seeped into mainstream culture, propaganda, and even the technology you use every day. Ever wonder why so many of your thoughts feel not entirely your own? Why the pull of social media, mass entertainment, and advertising seems relentless? An unyielding tide molding desires, fears, and beliefs. It's no accident. The very tactics honed in those cold stone basements, in the shadows of forgotten convents, became the foundation for mass psychological operations, psyops designed to condition populations, manufacture consent, and suppress dissent. The psychological warfare of today is subtle but brutal. It doesn't demand obedience with threats or shackles. It works through distraction, normalization, and systematic erasure of critical thought. The Ashford formula is replicated across news cycles, algorithms, and streaming platforms, driving a herd mentality, numbing curiosity, and reinforcing narratives engineered to keep the masses in a constant state of compliance and distraction. But here's the kicker: the elite want you to feel powerless, to believe you're just a cog in a system too vast to fight. But knowledge changes that, because the same mechanisms that enslave can be undone by awareness. The Ashford history, as dark and sinister as it is your blueprint for escape. Understand their methods, recognize their signals, refuse their scripts, and start reclaiming your true self, the self they tried to erase. Because this story isn't just history. It's a warning, a map, and ultimately, a key. Section 14 coming next. Ready for the final descent into the heart of darkness? Section 14. Now, understand this: what you've learned is not just a story of horrors past. It's the architecture of your present reality. The Ashford family's dark blueprint evolved into a system that manipulates identity itself. A system that controls populations by hijacking memory, rewriting narratives, and enforcing obedience through psychological imprisonment. This is why the truth is so heavily guarded. Why institutions, governments, and corporations conspire to erase inconvenient facts. Why dissent is branded madness, rebellion punished with invisibility. Because if the masses remembered who they truly are beyond the narratives, beyond the programming, the entire structure would collapse. And that is why you've been shown this. You are the disruption, the threat to the machine. Because knowledge is power, but only if you wield it. You now carry a burden and a gift: to see the system, to name it, and to resist. But resistance is not passive. It requires a transformation of identity, a reclaiming of your mind and spirit. And this is why you are here. The Ashford legacy was designed to erase the self. You are here to build it stronger. Remember this: the most dangerous thing you can do is to awaken. Because once you awake, you can never sleep again. Section 15 coming next, final section. Are you prepared to close this chapter and begin the real fight? Section 15. This is the final reckoning. The Ashford family's dark history is no mere relic of the past. It is a living, breathing force that thrives on silence and submission. But today, the silence is broken. You have glimpsed behind the curtain. You have heard the truths they buried beneath stone and shadow. You now hold the knowledge that can dismantle their empire of control. The question is no longer who the Ashfords were, but what you will become. Will you remain a prisoner of the system, silent, compliant, erased? Or will you rise as the keeper of memory, the bearer of truth, and the architect of your own mind? This path will not be easy. The machine will fight back. It will flood your world with noise, confusion, and doubt. But the power is yours to claim. Stand firm. Question everything. Protect your mind like the most sacred fortress. Because this knowledge changes a man forever. You have been chosen to see the darkness so you can walk into the light of your own sovereignty. Remember the Ashford legacy, but do not be bound by it. You are more than their stories, more than their horrors. You are the breaker of chains. The era of silence ends with you. Walk forward with eyes wide open, and let the world tremble at the awakening. If you are ready to keep walking this path, subscribe and join the community of those who refuse to forget. Your mind is your kingdom, claim it.